Look here, sweetheart. I don't know who made the mistake, but this isn't a charity flight. Grab whatever discount bag you brought and move to the back where you belong. Real passengers are boarding. The words sliced through the luxury cabin like a blade through silk. Derek Mitchell stood in the doorway of the private jet, his $8,000 Armani suit perfectly pressed, his gold Patek Philippe watch catching the afternoon light streaming through the oval windows. He looked down at the woman sitting in seat 1A with the kind of disgust usually reserved for stepping in something unpleasant. The woman didn't move. She didn't even look up from her phone. She wore a faded Yale hoodie that had seen better days, jeans with actual wear marks and beaten sneakers that told stories of 1,000 journeys. Her leather backpack sitting on the floor beside her feet looked like it had survived a war. Derek's jaw clenched. He wasn't used to being ignored, especially not by people who looked like her. "Excuse me," he said louder, his voice carrying that particular frequency of entitlement that makes flight attendants want to quit their jobs. "I'm talking to you." The woman finally looked up. Her name was Zara Coleman, though Derek had no idea he was staring at the CEO of Meridian Logistics, a $2.8 billion empire she had built from absolutely nothing. Her dark eyes were calm, unreadable, the kind of steady gaze that had stared down boardrooms full of men who thought they were smarter than her. "I heard you," Zara said, softly. Her voice had the quality of still water, deep, unmoving, dangerous when disturbed. Derek stepped into the cabin, fully bringing with him the scent of expensive cologne and the unmistakable aura of someone who had never been told no. Behind him trailed his wife, Catherine, a woman who looked like she had been beautiful once before. Years of living with Derek had carved shadows under her eyes. She carried a small designer dog carrier and the weight of 1,000 small humiliations. "Then you understand the situation." Derek continued gesturing dismissively at Zara. "This is premium seating. I paid $15,000 for priority placement. I'm not sharing first class with—" He paused, searching for words that wouldn't get him in legal trouble while still making his point crystal clear. With mistakes, he finished. The cabin fell silent except for the low hum of the auxiliary power unit spinning up outside. Rain drummed against the windows of the aircraft sitting on the tarmac at Westchester County Airport. It was 3:47 p.m. on a gray Thursday afternoon, and Derek Mitchell had exactly 9 minutes left as a free man. He didn't know it yet. Zara set her phone down on the leather armrest. Her movement was deliberate, controlled, like a chess player who had been thinking 7 moves ahead while her opponent was still figuring out how the pieces moved. "Sir," she said. And there was something in the way she said it that should have warned Derek. It was the tone of someone who had spent years being underestimated and had learned to use it as a weapon. "I think there's been a misunderstanding." Derek laughed. It was a harsh, ugly sound that echoed off the mahogany interior panels. "Oh, I understand perfectly. You're in my seat. Move." That's when Sophia Morales appeared from the galley. She was the lead flight attendant, 28 years old, with the kind of professional composure that came from dealing with entitled passengers on a daily basis. She had worked private aviation for 6 years, and she could smell trouble the moment it walked up the aircraft stairs. "Is everything all right?" Sophia asked, though the tension in the cabin was thick enough to cut with a knife. Derek turned to her with relief. Finally, someone who would handle this properly. "Yes, thank you. This woman is in my seat. Could you please escort her to coach? I assume there was some kind of booking error." Sophia glanced at her tablet, then at Zara, then back at Derek. Something flickered across her face. Recognition, maybe, or concern. "Sir, what seat were you assigned?" "1." Derek said firmly. "Premium bulkhead. I always book 1A. Sophia looked down at her passenger manifest again. Her finger traced the screen. Derek watched her face change as she read something that clearly surprised her. "I see," Sophia said, carefully. "And ma'am, could I see your boarding documentation?" Zara reached into her hoodie pocket and pulled out a slim leather wallet. She handed Sophia a boarding pass that was printed on heavy cardstock with the aircraft's tail number embossed at the top. Derek glanced at it dismissively. Anyone could fake a boarding pass these days. But Sophia's eyebrows rose as she read it. She looked at the pass, then at Zara, then back at the pass. "Ma'am, this shows you're in seat 1A as well," Sophia said slowly. Derek's face flushed red. "That's impossible. Check your system. I guarantee you there's been an error, and I guarantee you I have priority." "Let me check with the captain," Sophia said diplomatically. "No need," Derek interrupted. "I'll handle this myself." He turned back to Zara, and now his veneer of false politeness was completely gone. "Look, I don't know what game you're playing, but it ends now. I paid for this seat. You didn't. Move to the back where you belong, or I'll have you removed." Zara's expression didn't change. "Mr. Mitchell. Derek Mitchell. And you are comfortable," Zara said simply. "And I'm not moving." The words hit Derek like a slap. In his 45 years on this planet, no one had ever simply refused him like this. Not a waiter, not a clerk, certainly not a woman who looked like she shopped at discount stores. "I don't think you understand who you're dealing with," Derek said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "I'm a senior vice president at Cromwell Finance. I manage over $3 billion in assets. I fly private every week. You look like you've never seen the inside of an aircraft that wasn't serving peanuts." Behind Derek, Catherine shifted uncomfortably in the entryway. She had seen this before, the escalation, the ugly words that came next. She wanted to say something to stop what she knew was coming, but 23 years of marriage to Derek had taught her that intervention only made things worse. Zara picked up her phone and checked the time. 3:51 p.m. "Mr. Mitchell," she said, and her voice was still that calm, dangerous still water. "This conversation will cost you everything you value." Derek laughed again, louder this time. "Is that supposed to scare me, sweetheart? What are you going to do? Tweet about it?" He leaned down closer to her seat, invading her personal space using his height as intimidation. "Here's how this is going to work. You're going to get up, grab your little backpack, and walk to whatever seat you actually belong in. And if you don't, I'm going to call security and have you dragged off this aircraft in handcuffs. Do we understand each other?" Zara looked up at him. For a moment their eyes met, and Derek felt something he wasn't expecting. It wasn't fear or submission. It was pity. "We understand each other perfectly," Zara said quietly. From the cockpit, Captain James Rodriguez was listening to every word. He was a 20-year veteran of private aviation, a man who had seen every kind of passenger drama imaginable. But this felt different. This felt dangerous. He picked up his phone and started recording. At that exact moment, in a corporate office 3 miles away, Zara's executive assistant, Maria Santos, felt her phone buzz. She glanced at the screen and saw a simple text message, code black. "Mitchell situation. Implement Plan J." Maria's fingers flew across her keyboard. Within 30 seconds, she had pulled Derek Mitchell's complete financial profile, his employment history, and his litigation record. What she found made her stomach turn. 3 HR complaints, 2 settled discrimination lawsuits, a pattern of behavior that Cromwell Finance had been covering up for years. She reached for her secure phone line. Back in the aircraft cabin, Derek was done with conversation. He reached down and grabbed Zara's backpack from the floor. "Since you won't move yourself, I'll move your belongings for you," he said. The bag was heavier than he expected, much heavier. Inside was a laptop that cost more than his car, but Derek didn't know that. He just knew it felt like dead weight as he hauled it toward the back of the cabin. Sir Sophia said sharply, "You cannot touch another passenger's belongings." "Watch me," Derek snapped. He walked to the back of the cabin and dropped the bag onto a seat in the last row. It hit the leather cushion with a heavy thud. There, he said, dusting off his hands. Problem solved. He walked back to seat 1A and sat down, buckling his seatbelt with exaggerated satisfaction. Much better, he said to no one in particular. Now we can get this show on the road. Zara hadn't moved. She was still sitting in the aisle seat next to 1A, her hands folded in her lap, watching Derek with that same calm expression. Sophia Zara said quietly, "Could you please ask Captain Rodriguez to delay takeoff?" "Absolutely not." Derek interrupted. "We're already behind schedule. I have a board meeting in San Francisco at 8 p.m. I'm not missing it because someone can't read a seating chart." Sophia looked between them, clearly torn. "Ma'am, if there's a seating dispute, perhaps we could—" "There's no dispute," Zara said. "But I think the captain should be aware that we have a situation that requires his attention." Derek's phone rang. He glanced at the screen and saw his assistant's number. "This better be important, Jenny," he barked into the phone. "I'm on an aircraft." Mr. Mitchell, came the panicked voice on the other end. "I'm getting calls from reporters. Something about an incident on a plane." "Sir, they're asking about discrimination allegations." Derek's blood went cold. He looked around the cabin and noticed for the first time that the passenger in 3A, a middle-aged woman named Linda Parker, was holding her phone up and pointing it directly at him. "Are you recording this?" Derek demanded. Linda didn't lower her phone. "I started recording the moment you called her sweetheart and told her to move to the back. This is going straight to TikTok." Derek's face went white, then red, then white again. "You can't do that. Delete it. Right now." "Actually, I can," Linda said calmly. "We're in a private aircraft, not a public space, but passenger safety recordings are completely legal under Federal Aviation Administration guidelines." Derek looked around the cabin wildly. In seat 4B, another passenger, Miguel Santos, was also holding up his phone. "This is insane," Derek said. "You people are ganging up on me." The words hung in the air like smoke. "You people!" Sophia's jaw tightened. Captain Rodriguez's voice came over the cabin intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We're going to be returning to the gate for a brief passenger safety assessment. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." Derek shot to his feet, his seatbelt forgotten. "This is ridiculous. I have a meeting. I'm not some kind of safety threat." "Sir, please return to your seat," Sophia said firmly. "I'm not going anywhere," Derek said. "This whole thing is a setup. Can't you see what's happening here? This woman is playing some kind of victim card, and you're all falling for it." Zara finally spoke. "Mr. Mitchell, you might want to sit down." "Don't you tell me what to do," Derek snapped. "I don't know who you think you are, but—" "My name is Zara Coleman," she said quietly. Derek stared at her. The name meant nothing to him, and he said, "And you're sitting in my seat. On my aircraft." The words hit the cabin like a thunderclap. Derek's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. "That's impossible," he whispered. Sophia checked her tablet one more time and her face went pale. She looked up at Zara with something close to awe. "Ma'am, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize. The manifest just says Z. Coleman and I." "It's all right, Sophia," Zara said gently. "You're doing your job exactly right." Derek was still staring, his mind trying to process what he was hearing. "You can't own this aircraft. You're... Black Zara suggested helpfully. Derek's mouth snapped shut. Wearing a hoodie, Zara continued, "Not dressed like your idea of a CEO." The aircraft was rolling now, returning to the gate. Through the windows, Derek could see ground crews scrambling vehicles with flashing lights racing across the tarmac. "This isn't happening," Derek said to himself. "This isn't real." But it was real. And it was just beginning. The Gulfstream G550 shuddered to a stop at Gate 7, and Derek Mitchell's world began to unravel at the speed of light. Ladies and gentlemen, we've returned to the gate for a brief operational delay. Captain Rodriguez's voice crackled over the intercom. Please remain seated while we sort out a passenger services issue. Derek was anything but seated. He paced the narrow aisle of the aircraft like a caged animal, his phone pressed to his ear, his voice rising with each failed attempt to control the narrative. Jerry, I don't care what it costs. Get me a lawyer. Now. Some woman is trying to frame me for discrimination, and these people are recording everything. Zara remained exactly where she had been, calm as a lake before a storm. She hadn't moved to reclaim seat 1A. She didn't need to. The point had been made, and now she was content to watch Derek destroy himself one word at a time. Sir Sophia said for the fourth time, I really need you to take a seat. I'm not sitting anywhere near her. Derek snapped, pointing at Zara like she was radioactive. This whole thing is a setup. She's probably some professional victim who goes around looking for lawsuits. Miguel Santos, the passenger in 4B, adjusted his phone to get a better angle. He was a marketing executive for a tech startup, and he recognized a viral moment when he saw one. His Instagram live stream already had 3,000 viewers and climbing. Can everyone hear this? Miguel whispered to his phone. This man just accused a woman of being a professional victim because she wouldn't give up her seat to him. The comments on his live stream were exploding. OMG, is this really happening? Someone identify this man. This is disgusting. Plot twist. What if she really does own the plane? Derek's phone rang again. This time it was his boss. Derek. What the hell is going on? I'm getting calls from our PR team about some kind of incident. Please tell me you're not involved in anything that's going to end up on the evening news. Derek stepped toward the back of the cabin, lowering his voice, but the acoustics of the aircraft meant everyone could still hear every word. Bob, it's nothing. Just some misunderstanding with seating arrangements. I'll be in San Francisco on schedule. Is it true you're on Meridian Logistics' corporate jet? Derek paused. How did you know that? Because I just got off the phone with their legal department. Derek, please tell me you didn't do something stupid. I didn't do anything. This woman was in my seat, so I moved her stuff. That's not a crime. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Derek Bob's voice was deadly quiet. What woman? Some passenger who thinks she owns the place. She's claiming to be some CEO, but look at her. She's dressed like she works at a warehouse. Another long silence. Derek hung up the phone. Right now. Don't say another word to anyone until you talk to our attorneys. The line went dead. Derek stared at his phone, and for the first time since this nightmare began, he felt a cold finger of fear touch his spine. From her seat, Zara watched Derek's face cycle through confusion, anger, and the first dawning realization that he might be in serious trouble. She felt no satisfaction in his distress. This wasn't about revenge. This was about something much more important. She was 12 years old the first time someone told her she didn't belong somewhere. The Riverside Country Club had just opened its pools for the summer, and Zara's foster mother had scraped together the money for a day pass, thinking it would be a special treat. Zara had been so excited. She had never seen a pool that wasn't crowded with dozens of screaming children. She was standing at the edge of the crystal-clear water, her toes curled over the concrete lip when the pool manager appeared beside her. "Excuse me, little girl," he had said. "This pool is for members and their guests only. Your kind doesn't swim here." Zara had looked around at all the white faces in the water, the white families lounging on white pool chairs, and she understood. She didn't argue. She didn't cry. She just turned around and walked back to the changing room, her day pass clutched in her small fist. That night she had made herself a promise. Someday she would own the pool. 26 years later, she owned a lot more than that. Catherine Mitchell had been silent since boarding the aircraft, but now she spoke for the first time. "Derek, please just sit down. Her voice was small, exhausted, the sound of a woman who had watched her husband humiliate people for so long that she no longer had the energy to be surprised by it. "Don't tell me what to do," Derek snapped at his wife. "This isn't your problem." "Everything you do is my problem," Catherine said quietly, and something in her tone made everyone in the cabin look at her. "I'm tired of being embarrassed by your behavior." Derek's face flushed red. "My behavior? I'm the victim here. I paid $15,000 for premium seating and instead I get harassment and false accusations." Linda Parker, still recording from seat 3A, spoke up. "Sir, I've been filming since you boarded. You told Ms. Coleman to move to the back where she belongs. You called her sweetheart. You grabbed her belongings without permission. What part of that makes you the victim?" "You don't understand the context," Derek said desperately. "I travel private aviation every week. I know the protocols. When there's a seating error, the person who paid the higher fee gets priority. It's standard procedure." "Show me your boarding pass," Zara said suddenly. Everyone turned to look at her. She was still sitting calmly, but now there was something different in her voice, a sharpness that hadn't been there before. What Derek said. "Your boarding pass. You claim you paid $15,000 for seat 1A. Show me the documentation." Derek fumbled in his suit jacket and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. He waved it in the air like a flag. "Right here. Seat 1A. Premium bulkhead." Sophia reached out her hand. "May I see that?" Sir Derek hesitated, then handed it over. Sophia unfolded the paper and read it carefully. Her expression grew confused. "Sir, this shows seat 1C. "That's impossible," Derek said. "I always book 1A. Sophia held up the boarding pass. In clear black print, it read, "Seat 1C, starboard aisle." The cabin fell silent, except for the rain drumming against the windows and the distant sound of emergency vehicles gathering outside. "I don't understand," Derek said, and for the first time since boarding he sounded genuinely confused rather than angry. "I specifically requested 1A. I always sit in 1A. Miguel Santos, still live streaming, zoomed in on Derek's face. "Ladies and gentlemen, this man just realized he was never supposed to be in that seat in the first place." Derek grabbed his boarding pass back from Sophia and stared at it. The numbers didn't change no matter how hard he looked. "This is wrong," he said. "Someone made an error. I need to call my travel agent." Mr. Mitchell, Zara said softly. "Would you like to know what seat you forcibly took my belongings from?" Derek looked at her with dread. "Seat 1A, the owner's seat. The seat that's reserved on every flight for the person who actually owns this aircraft." Sophia checked her tablet again and nodded. "The manifest shows Ms. Coleman as the primary passenger. All other seats are secondary bookings through the charter service." Derek's legs seemed to give out beneath him. He dropped into the nearest seat, which happened to be 1C, exactly where he should have been sitting all along. "This can't be happening," he whispered. Outside, ground crews were setting up barriers around the aircraft. Through the oval windows, Derek could see news vans beginning to arrive. Someone had tipped off the media, and the story was already spreading beyond social media. Captain Rodriguez emerged from the cockpit. He was a compact man with graying hair and the kind of steady presence that came from 2 decades of keeping expensive aircraft and entitled passengers safely in the air. "Ms. Coleman," he said respectfully, "I've contacted ground control and airport security. There are some people who'd like to speak with you about the incident." "Of course, Captain. Thank you for handling this professionally." Derek shot to his feet again. "What incident? I made a seating mistake. This is all blown completely out of proportion." Captain Rodriguez looked at Derek with the expression of a man who had seen enough in his career to spot trouble from 1,000 miles away. "Sir, I've been listening to the cabin audio for the past 20 minutes. You told another passenger to move to the back where she belongs. You physically removed her belongings from her seat. You called her sweetheart in a clearly derogatory manner, and you've made several statements that could be construed as discriminatory. I didn't mean anything by those words, Derek said desperately. I was just trying to resolve a seating confusion. Sir, in federal aviation law, there's no such thing as accidental discrimination. Intent is irrelevant. Impact is everything. Derek's phone buzzed with a text message from his assistant. Sir Cromwell Finance stock is down 3%. Emergency board meeting called. They want you to return immediately. The walls were closing in. Meanwhile, 3 miles away, Maria Santos was working her phone like a conductor leading an orchestra. As Zara's executive assistant and chief of staff, she had been preparing for this moment for months. Not this specific moment, but something like it. The world was full of Derek Mitchells, and sooner or later one of them was going to cross the wrong line with the wrong person. David, it's Maria. I need you to activate the PR crisis protocol, but in reverse. We're not managing damage control, we're managing justice documentation. David Kim, Meridian Logistics head of public relations, was already pulling up the company's social media accounts. The video from the aircraft is already going viral, David said. LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. Someone named Miguel Santos is live streaming the whole thing. We're up to 500,000 views and climbing. Good. Have our legal team prepared for a charter contract violation lawsuit. Mr. Mitchell signed an agreement that explicitly prohibits harassment of other passengers. He's in breach. What about the discrimination angle? Document everything, but don't lead with it. Let the evidence speak for itself. The video is clear. His own words are condemning him. While Maria coordinated the corporate response, Derek was spiraling deeper into panic. He had called his lawyer, his boss, his travel agent, and his wife's therapist. No one was telling him what he wanted to hear. Catherine, he said, turning to his wife with desperation. Tell them this is all a misunderstanding. Tell them you saw what really happened. Catherine looked at her husband with eyes that had once sparkled with love and now held nothing but exhaustion. I saw exactly what happened, Derek. I saw you humiliate another human being because you thought you could get away with it. Whose side are you on? Derek hissed. I'm on the side of basic human decency, Catherine said quietly. Something you seem to have forgotten somewhere along the way. The aircraft door opened with a soft, pneumatic hiss, and 2 uniformed airport security officers climbed aboard, followed by a woman in a dark blue suit carrying a federal badge. I'm Agent Maria Vasquez, FBI. The woman said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had dealt with federal crimes in aviation before. We're here to investigate reports of interference with flight operations. Derek's face went white. FBI. This is just a seating dispute. Agent Vasquez looked around the cabin, taking in the scene. Multiple passengers with phones recording, a visibly shaken man in an expensive suit. A woman sitting calmly in the eye of the storm. Sir, are you Derek Mitchell? Yes, but I want my lawyer present before I answer any questions. Mr. Mitchell, you're not under arrest at this time. However, I do need to inform you that interfering with flight crew operations is a federal crime punishable by up to 20 years in prison. Derek's legs gave out completely, and he collapsed into seat 1C. 20 years, he whispered. That's the maximum sentence, Agent Vasquez said. The actual penalty depends on the severity of the interference and any aggravating factors. She looked at Sophia. Ma'am, as the senior flight attendant, could you walk me through what happened? Sophia straightened her shoulders and spoke clearly. Agent Vasquez, Mr. Mitchell boarded the aircraft and immediately demanded that Ms. Coleman vacate her assigned seat. When she declined, he became verbally aggressive, used discriminatory language, and physically removed her belongings from the seat without permission. Did he threaten her? He told her he would have her thrown off the plane if she didn't comply with his demands. Agent Vasquez made notes on a small tablet. And Ms. Coleman, how did you respond? Zara spoke for the first time since the FBI had boarded. "Agent Vasquez." I remained calm and asked the captain to delay takeoff for safety reasons. "At what point did Mr. Mitchell learn that you were the aircraft owner when he was already sitting in my seat making phone calls about how he had successfully handled the situation?" Agent Vasquez looked at Derek, who was staring at his hands in his lap like a child who had been caught stealing cookies. "Mr. Mitchell, is this account accurate?" Derek's lawyer had told him not to say anything, but the pressure was too much. "I made a mistake. I thought she was... I didn't know who she was." "What did you think she was?" Derek looked around the cabin desperately, but no one was going to save him from this moment. "I thought she was someone who didn't belong in first class." The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Agent Vasquez closed her tablet. "Mr. Mitchell, I'm placing you under arrest for interference with flight crew operations under Federal Statute 49 U.S.C. 46504. As the handcuffs clicked around Derek's wrists, his phone buzzed one last time with a text message from his boss, Derek. "You're terminated effective immediately. Security will escort you from the building. Don't come back." Outside, the aircraft news trucks were lined up like soldiers preparing for battle. Derek Mitchell's private discrimination had just become very, very public, and the consequences were just getting started. The handcuffs were cold against Derek Mitchell's wrists, but not nearly as cold as the realization that his life was over. Agent Vasquez read him his rights in a clear, professional voice that cut through the cabin like a scalpel. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Derek barely heard the words. He was staring at Zara Coleman, trying to understand how a woman in a faded hoodie could have destroyed his entire existence in less than an hour. "You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you." The irony wasn't lost on anyone in the cabin. Derek Mitchell, who had spent his entire adult life buying his way out of problems, would now be assigned a public defender. "Do you understand the rights I have just read to you?" Derek nodded numbly. As the FBI agent prepared to escort him off the aircraft, Derek turned back to Zara one last time. "I didn't know," he said desperately. "If I had known who you were, I never would have..." Zara looked at him with something that might have been sadness. "That's exactly the problem, Mr. Mitchell. You didn't think I deserved basic respect unless I could prove I was important enough to earn it." The words hit Derek like a physical blow. He opened his mouth to respond, but Agent Vasquez was already guiding him toward the aircraft door. Ma'am Catherine Mitchell spoke up suddenly. Everyone turned to look at Derek's wife, who had been silent for most of the nightmare. "Miss Coleman, I want to apologize. Not just for today, but for all the times I stayed quiet when I should have spoken up." Zara studied Catherine's face and saw something there that she recognized. The exhaustion of a woman who had been complicit in cruelty for so long that she had forgotten what it felt like to stand up for what was right. "Mrs. Mitchell, you're not responsible for your husband's choices, but you are responsible for your own." Catherine nodded, tears beginning to form in her eyes. "I'm done being silent." As Derek was led away in handcuffs, Catherine made a decision that had been 23 years in the making. She pulled out her phone and called her lawyer. "Susan, it's Catherine Mitchell. I need you to prepare divorce papers." "Yes, immediately." Outside the aircraft, the media circus was in full swing. News trucks from every major network had descended on Westchester County Airport. Social media was exploding with hashtags Seatgate Derek Mitchell Zara Coleman Justice at 30,000 feet. Miguel Santos was still live streaming, and his viewer count had reached 2.3 million. The comments were coming so fast they were impossible to read. Linda Parker had uploaded her video to TikTok with the caption, "Rich white man demands black woman give up her seat." Plot twist: she owns the plane. The video had been viewed 15 million times in the past hour, But the real explosion was happening in corporate boardrooms across the country. At Cromwell Finance headquarters in Manhattan, the emergency board meeting was in chaos. How did we not know about this, demanded Margaret Hoffman, the chief executive officer. How does a senior VP go viral for discrimination without us having any warning? Robert Cromwell, the company founder and board chairman, was staring at his phone in disbelief. The video has 40 million views across all platforms. Our stock is down 12% and falling. What's our liability exposure? Asked the general counsel. If this goes to civil court, we're looking at potentially unlimited damages. Meridian Logistics has enough money to bury us in legal fees alone. Margaret stood up and paced to the window overlooking Central Park. Pull Derek's personnel file. I want to know if there were warning signs we missed. The Human Resources Director, Patricia Kim, was already pulling up Derek's records on her laptop. Her face went pale as she read. We have a problem, Patricia said quietly. Derek has 3 formal HR complaints filed against him in the past 5 years, all involving discriminatory behavior toward minorities and women. The room fell silent. Were any of these complaints substantiated? Margaret asked. 2 were settled quietly with financial agreements and non-disclosure clauses. The 3rd was dismissed after the complainant suddenly withdrew her statement. Jesus Christ, Robert muttered. We've been covering up a pattern of discrimination for years. Margaret turned away from the window. Patricia, I want Derek's access revoked immediately. Security, IT, everything. He's terminated for cause effective immediately. What about the settlements, if this goes public? They're already public, Margaret said grimly, holding up her phone. Someone leaked Derek's entire employment history to the media. The Washington Post just published an expose on our settlement payments. While Cromwell Finance burned, Zara Coleman was having a very different kind of meeting. She had moved to the aircraft's conference area, a luxurious space with leather chairs arranged around a mahogany table. Sophia had brought her a cup of tea, and Captain Rodriguez was providing her with a detailed incident report. Ms. Coleman, I've documented everything Captain Rodriguez said. Audio recordings, video from the cabin security system, witness statements from all passengers. The evidence is comprehensive. Thank you, Captain. Your professionalism throughout this situation has been exemplary. Zara's phone buzzed with a call from Maria Santos. Maria, what's the current situation, ma'am? It's unprecedented. The story has gone international. BBC, CNN, International, Al Jazeera, they're all running with it. Zara Coleman is trending in 14 countries. What's our legal exposure? Actually, we're in an excellent position. Derek Mitchell signed our standard charter agreement, which includes a zero-tolerance harassment clause. He violated the contract the moment he made discriminatory statements toward another passenger. Zara smiled grimly. So we can sue him for breach of contract in addition to everything else. Exactly. Our legal team is preparing a comprehensive lawsuit for contract violation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and defamation. How much are we seeking? $5 million in damages plus attorney's fees and a public apology. Make it $10 million. And I want the apology published as a full-page advertisement in the Wall Street Journal. Done. Ma'am, there's something else. We've been contacted by the Department of Transportation. They want to discuss implementing new industry-wide policies to prevent discrimination in private aviation. Zara paused, considering the implications. This was bigger than Derek Mitchell. This was about changing an entire industry that had operated on unspoken hierarchies for decades. Schedule a meeting for next week, and Maria start drafting a proposal for the Aviation Equality Initiative. If we're going to change things, we might as well change everything. Meanwhile, Derek Mitchell was experiencing the reality of federal detention for the first time in his privileged life. The holding cell at the FBI field office in White Plains was nothing like the luxury he was accustomed to. Concrete walls, fluorescent lighting, and a metal bench that hurt his back. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his Rolex had been confiscated, and his phone was locked in an evidence bag. He had one phone call and he used it to contact his attorney. Jonathan, thank God. You have to get me out of here. This whole thing is insane. Jonathan Pierce was one of New York's most expensive defense attorneys, a man who specialized in getting wealthy people out of expensive problems. But even he sounded shaken. Derek, I've been following the news coverage. This is a public relations nightmare. Every major media outlet in the country is running your story. Can you get me out on bail? That's not your biggest problem right now. Your biggest problem is that the video evidence is ironclad. You're on camera committing multiple federal crimes. The FBI has you dead to rights. Derek's voice cracked. What am I looking at? Federal interference with flight operations carries a maximum sentence of 20 years. Realistically, for a first offense, you're looking at 2 to 5 years minimum. 5 years? Derek's voice was barely a whisper. Derek, that's if we plea bargain and the prosecution is feeling generous. If this goes to trial and the jury sees that video, you could be looking at the full sentence. Can't we settle this? Pay her off? Make it go away? Jonathan was quiet for a long moment. Derek, I've been practicing law for 30 years. I've never seen evidence this clear-cut. Zara Coleman has you on video discriminating against her, physically removing her belongings and making explicitly racist statements. There's no defense. I never said anything racist. Derek, you told a black woman to move to the back where she belongs. In the context of American history, that phrase has specific and unmistakable racial connotations. Any jury is going to see it that way. Derek slumped against the concrete wall. For the first time in his adult life, money couldn't solve his problems. Back on the aircraft, the last passengers were finally disembarking. Miguel Santos had ended his live stream after 5 hours, and his followers were already organizing boycotts of Cromwell Finance. Linda Parker shook Zara's hand before leaving. Ms. Coleman, thank you for handling that with such grace. I have a 12-year-old daughter, and I want her to see that video. I want her to understand that dignity isn't about what you're wearing or what you look like. Mrs. Parker, please tell your daughter that her voice matters. When people like you speak up, it makes all the difference. Sophia was cleaning up the cabin when she approached Zara. Miss Coleman, I've been working private aviation for 6 years, and I've seen a lot of discrimination. Usually it's subtle. Passengers getting accidentally downgraded longer wait times for service crew members making assumptions about tip amounts. Today is the first time I've seen someone fight back effectively. Sophia, you handled this perfectly. Your professionalism protected everyone on this aircraft. Ma'am, can I ask you something personal? Zara nodded. How did you stay so calm? If someone had treated me the way Mr. Mitchell treated you, I would have lost my temper. Zara was quiet for a moment, thinking back to that 12-year-old girl standing at the edge of a swimming pool she wasn't allowed to enter. Sophia, anger is a luxury I've never been able to afford. When you're fighting a system that expects you to fail, you have to be twice as smart, twice as prepared, and twice as calm as everyone else. The moment you lose your temper, you become the stereotype they want you to be. But doesn't that get exhausting? Zara smiled, and for the first time all day it reached her eyes. It used to. But you know what I learned. The quiet ones are always underestimated. And being underestimated is the greatest advantage you can have. Captain Rodriguez appeared from the cockpit with his final report. Ms. Coleman, everything is documented and filed. Airport security has cleared us for departure whenever you're ready. Actually, Captain, I think I'll drive back to the city. I need some time to think. Of course, ma'am. Should I have the aircraft prepared for your San Francisco meeting tomorrow? Cancel San Francisco. Tomorrow I'm meeting with the Department of Transportation in Washington. It's time to make some changes. As Zara gathered her belongings, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. She almost deleted it without reading, but something made her open it. Ms. Coleman, this is Catherine Mitchell. I know you have no reason to listen to me, but I wanted you to know that I've filed for divorce. I'm also planning to testify against Derek in any legal proceedings. What he did today was unforgivable, but it wasn't the first time. I should have stopped him years ago. I'm sorry it took your courage to give me mine." Zara stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, "Mrs. Mitchell, it's never too late to choose what's right. If you need any support during this process, please don't hesitate to reach out." As she stepped off the aircraft and into the crisp October air, Zara could see news trucks still lined up outside the airport fence. Tomorrow, Derek Mitchell would be headlines around the world. But tonight, she was just a woman who had refused to give up her seat. She thought about all the times she had been underestimated, dismissed, or overlooked because people saw her appearance before they saw her accomplishments. She thought about every woman who had ever been told to move to the back, every person who had ever been made to feel like they didn't belong. Derek Mitchell had picked the wrong seat. But more than that, he had picked the wrong woman. And now the entire world would see what happened when privilege met consequence at 30,000 feet. The battle was won. But the war for equality had only just begun. The first domino fell at 11:47 p.m. Eastern Time, exactly 8 hours after Derek Mitchell was arrested. Cromwell Finance's stock had closed down 18% in after-hours trading. The company's social media accounts were flooded with thousands of comments demanding Derek's termination and calling for boycotts. The firm's largest client, a pension fund worth $2.8 billion, had already sent a formal letter requesting a review of their relationship. But the real earthquake was happening in corner offices and boardrooms across Manhattan's financial district. Margaret Hoffman. Cromwell Finance's CEO was in her Park Avenue office at midnight, surrounded by crisis management consultants, lawyers, and public relations specialists. The emergency response team had been working non-stop since the video went viral. "How bad is it?" Margaret asked David Chen, the head of public relations. David looked exhausted. He had been fielding media calls for 6 hours straight. "It's unprecedented. Every major news outlet wants a statement. 60 Minutes called. 2020 called. The Today Show wants an interview with you personally. What are they asking whether we knew about Derek's pattern of discriminatory behavior? Whether this is representative of company culture? Whether we're going to compensate Ms. Coleman beyond any legal settlement?" Margaret rubbed her temples. "And the stock down 22% in international markets. London opened 30 minutes ago and we're getting hammered. Financial analysts are calling it the fastest reputation destruction they've ever seen." Patricia Kim, the HR director, looked up from her laptop. "Margaret, we have a bigger problem. I've been going through Derek's past complaints, and I think we need to contact everyone who settled with us." "Why?" "Because if this goes to a discrimination lawsuit, those previous settlements could be introduced as evidence of a pattern. We could be looking at a class action suit." The room fell silent. Margaret had been CEO of Cromwell Finance for 8 years. She had navigated market crashes, regulatory investigations, and hostile takeovers, but she had never seen anything like this. "How much are we talking about? If every previous settlement gets reopened, plus damages from the Coleman incident, plus punitive damages for covering up Derek's behavior, we could be looking at 50 to 100 million in legal exposure." Margaret stood up and walked to the window overlooking Central Park. In the distance, she could see news trucks parked outside the building, their satellite arrays pointing skyward like metal flowers reaching for the sun. "Draft a statement," she said finally. "We're terminating Derek, effective immediately. We're conducting a comprehensive review of all past HR complaints, and we're implementing mandatory anti-discrimination training for all employees. What about Derek's severance package? He doesn't get one. Termination for cause means he forfeits everything: salary bonuses, stock options, pension contributions, all of it." David Chen made a note. "That's going to save us about $4 million. "It's not about the money," Margaret said quietly. "It's about accountability." While Cromwell Finance burned, Derek Mitchell was discovering what life looked like without his wealth to protect him. The federal holding cell had no windows, no clock, and no comfort. Derek had been there for 12 hours, and every minute felt like an eternity. His Italian leather shoes had been replaced with paper slippers. His custom-tailored shirt was wrinkled and stained with sweat. His perfectly styled hair was disheveled. But the worst part was the silence. For 45 years, Derek's phone had never stopped ringing. Business calls, social invitations, confirmation calls from exclusive restaurants and private clubs. Now there was nothing but the distant hum of fluorescent lights and the occasional footsteps of guards walking past his cell. At 2 a.m., a guard appeared with paperwork. "Mitchell, you made bail." Derek shot to his feet. "Thank God." "Who posted it?" "Your wife." Derek felt a surge of relief. Catherine must have come to her senses. She understood that this was all just a misunderstanding that had gotten out of control. But when he walked into the processing area, Catherine wasn't there. Instead, a man in a cheap suit was waiting with a clipboard. "Mr. Mitchell, I'm Steve Patterson, your court-appointed attorney. Your wife arranged for bail, but she asked me to inform you that she won't be picking you up. She's filed for divorce and obtained a restraining order. You're not allowed within 500 feet of your home or place of business." Derek stared at the man in disbelief. "That's impossible. Catherine would never." Steve handed him an envelope. "These are the court documents. You have 48 hours to arrange for removal of your personal belongings from the matrimonial home. All contact with Mrs. Mitchell must go through attorneys." Derek opened the envelope with trembling hands. The divorce papers were brutally thorough. Catherine was seeking full custody of their assets, citing a pattern of abusive and discriminatory behavior as grounds for fault-based divorce. "Where am I supposed to go?" Steve shrugged. "That's not my department. I'm just here to make sure you understand the terms of your bail. You can't leave the state. You can't contact Ms. Coleman or anyone involved in the incident. And you have to surrender your passport." Derek handed over his passport, the same passport that had taken him to exclusive resorts and private islands around the world. Now it was just another piece of confiscated property. "Mr. Patterson, what am I looking at legally? Federal interference with flight operations, possible civil rights violations, and breach of contract. Ms. Coleman's attorneys filed a $10 million lawsuit 3 hours ago. $10 million. That's insane. Actually, it's conservative. Given the video evidence and the media coverage, they could probably ask for $50 million and get it." Derek stumbled out of the FBI building into the cold pre-dawn air. For the first time in his adult life, he had nowhere to go. Meanwhile, 200 miles south in Washington, D.C., Zara Coleman was having a very different kind of morning. She had driven back to the city the night before, taking the long way through Connecticut and New York to clear her head. She had stopped at a small diner in New Jersey for coffee and pie, sitting anonymously among truck drivers and night shift workers who had no idea they were sharing breakfast with one of the country's most powerful CEOs. Now she was in her corner office on the 47th floor of the Meridian building, watching the sunrise over the Potomac River and reading the morning news coverage. Every major newspaper had the story on the front page. The Wall Street Journal, private jet discrimination incident highlights, aviation industry bias. The Washington Post, when privilege meets justice at 30,000 feet. The New York Times viral video exposes gaps in corporate anti-discrimination efforts. But it was the international coverage that really struck her. The BBC American CEO demonstrates power of quiet resistance. Le Monde, l'incident qui révèle les discriminations dans l'aviation privée. The story had resonated far beyond American borders. Maria Santos knocked on her office door. "Ma'am, the Department of Transportation is here for your 9 a.m. meeting. Send them in." Secretary of Transportation Jennifer Walsh entered with a small team of advisors. She was a career public servant who had risen through the ranks of Federal Aviation Administration before being appointed to the cabinet. "Ms. Coleman, Thank you for making time on such short notice. I've been following yesterday's incident, and I think we have an opportunity to make some real changes. Zara gestured to the conference table. Secretary Walsh, I'm listening. We've been looking at discrimination complaints in aviation for years, but they're usually buried in corporate HR departments or settled quietly with NDAs. Yesterday's incident is the first time we've had clear public evidence of the scope of the problem. What are you proposing? A comprehensive federal initiative to address discrimination in all forms of commercial aviation. Mandatory reporting of discrimination incidents, standardized training requirements, and federal oversight of industry practices. Zara leaned back in her chair. That sounds like a good start. What do you need from me? Your platform and your credibility. You've built one of the most successful logistics companies in the country. When you speak, people listen. We'd like you to chair a federal task force on aviation equality. Zara was quiet for a moment, considering the implications. Taking on a federal role would mean public scrutiny, media attention, and political pressure. It would also mean she could create real lasting change. Secretary Walsh, I accept. But I have some conditions. Name them. First, the task force has to have real authority to implement changes, not just make recommendations. Second, we include representatives from every level of the aviation industry, from baggage handlers to airline executives. And third, we make all proceedings public. No closed-door meetings, no classified reports. Complete transparency. Secretary Walsh smiled. Ms. Coleman, I think we're going to work very well together. Back in New York, Derek Mitchell's world was continuing to collapse in real time. He had spent the night in a cheap hotel near the airport, the kind of place he would never have imagined staying in his previous life. The room smelled like disinfectant and defeat. The walls were thin enough that he could hear every conversation, every argument, every sob from the neighboring rooms. At 8 a.m., his phone rang. It was his brother Michael calling from Seattle. Derek. What the hell happened? I'm seeing your name everywhere. Mike. It's all a misunderstanding. Some woman tried to frame me for discrimination, and now everyone's overreacting. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Derek, I watched the video. Everyone's watched the video. You told a woman to go to the back where she belongs. How is that a misunderstanding? Derek felt his last hope slipping away. If his own brother couldn't see his side of the story, who would? She was in my seat. Derek, she owned the plane, and even if she didn't, you can't talk to people like that. We didn't raise you to think you're better than other people because of your bank account. I don't think that. Then why did you assume she didn't belong in first class? Why did you call her sweetheart? Why did you physically remove her belongings? Derek couldn't answer because he didn't have an answer. The truth was too ugly to say out loud. He had made those assumptions because of the color of her skin and the clothes she was wearing. He had spent so many years surrounded by people who looked like him and thought like him that he had forgotten other people were human beings deserving of basic respect. Mike, I need help. Catherine filed for divorce. I'm probably going to prison. I have nowhere to go. Derek, you need to take responsibility for what you did. You need to apologize. Really apologize, not some lawyer-written statement. I can't apologize. My attorney says anything I say can be used against me in court. Then you've learned nothing from this. The line went dead. Derek stared at his phone, realizing that he was truly alone for the first time in his life. His wife had left him. His company had fired him. His brother had disowned him. His friends were avoiding his calls. He was a 45-year-old man with no job, no family, no home, and no future. Outside his hotel window, he could see protesters gathering with signs reading "Justice for Zara" and "End Aviation Discrimination." His face was on wanted posters and protest banners. He had become the symbol of everything wrong with privilege and power in America. And the worst part was, he was beginning to understand that they were right. Meanwhile, Zara Coleman was preparing to announce the launch of the most ambitious civil rights initiative in a generation. The Aviation Equality Alliance would be a $100 million commitment to ending discrimination in air travel. It would fund legal representation for victims, mandate industry-wide training, and create a national database to track incidents and hold companies accountable. But more than that, it would send a message that the days of quiet discrimination were over. The days of settling complaints with NDAs were over. The days of looking the other way were over. Derek Mitchell had thought he was stealing a seat. Instead, he had awakened a sleeping giant. And that giant was about to change everything. The media storm that engulfed Derek Mitchell's life moved with the speed and fury of a Category 5 hurricane. By dawn on Friday morning, less than 18 hours after his arrest, Derek had become the most hated man in America. His mugshot was meme material. His name was trending on every social platform. Late-night comedians were writing jokes about him. Cable news panels were debating whether his behavior represented a broader cultural problem. But the real destruction was happening in the corporate world, where reputation mattered more than quarterly earnings. At 6 a.m., Margaret Hoffman was back in her Cromwell finance office watching the company's stock price crater in European markets, down 31% in London, 28% in Frankfurt, 35% in Tokyo. International investors were fleeing anything associated with the Derek Mitchell scandal. Her assistant burst into the office without knocking. "Margaret, we have an emergency. The pension fund pulled their account. $2.8 billion gone. They issued a statement saying they can't work with a firm that tolerates discrimination." Margaret closed her eyes and took a deep breath. In one night, Derek Mitchell had cost her company nearly $3 billion in assets under management. How many other clients are threatening to leave 17 so far, representing about $8 billion in total assets? The math was brutal. Cromwell Finance managed approximately $40 billion. If they lost 20% of their clients over the Derek Mitchell scandal, it would be the largest reputation-driven collapse in Wall Street history. Margaret's phone rang. It was the chairman of the board. "Margaret, emergency board meeting in 1 hour. We're discussing your resignation." "My resignation? I didn't do anything wrong." "You hired Derek Mitchell. You promoted him. You ignored HR complaints about his behavior. The board feels that senior leadership failed in its oversight responsibilities." Margaret felt her own career slipping away. "Robert, I had no idea about Derek's pattern of behavior." Margaret, ignorance isn't a defense when you're running a company that manages $40 billion of other people's money. Our clients trust us to make sound judgments about character. We failed. The line went dead. Margaret looked out her window at the protesters gathering below. Signs reading, "Fire Margaret Hoffman" and "Clean House" at Cromwell were already appearing among the crowd. Her career was over, and she knew it. Meanwhile, Derek Mitchell was experiencing his own personal hell. He had been awake for 36 hours straight watching his life disintegrate in real time on his phone screen. His Twitter mentions were an endless stream of death threats and humiliation. His LinkedIn profile had been removed for community guidelines violations. His country club membership had been revoked. His gym membership had been canceled. His favorite restaurants had banned him. But the worst was still coming. At 8 a.m., his court-appointed attorney called with devastating news. "Derek, the FBI has expanded their investigation. They're looking at your entire employment history for evidence of a pattern of discrimination." What does that mean? It means they're contacting every person who filed a complaint against you, every colleague who witnessed discriminatory behavior, every client who might have information about your conduct. Derek's blood went cold. The settlements had non-disclosure agreements. NDAs don't apply to federal criminal investigations. The FBI can compel testimony from anyone they want. Derek thought about the 3 women who had filed complaints against him over the years. The African-American analyst he had repeatedly passed over for promotion. The Hispanic assistant he had made uncomfortable with his comments about people like her. The Asian American client he had suggested wasn't culturally sophisticated enough for certain investment strategies. He had thought those incidents were buried. He had thought money could make problems disappear. He was wrong. How bad is this going to get, Derek, if the FBI finds evidence of a pattern of discriminatory behavior? You could be looking at federal civil rights charges in addition to the aviation interference charges. We're talking about 5 to 10 years in federal prison minimum. Derek's phone slipped from his trembling hands. While Derek's world imploded, Zara Coleman was building something extraordinary. The Meridian Building's main conference room had been transformed into a war room for social justice. Lawyers, activists, corporate executives, and government officials filled every seat around the massive mahogany table. On the walls, multiple screens displayed social media feeds, news coverage, and legal documents related to the Derek Mitchell case. Maria Santos was coordinating the response like a general commanding an army. Legal update, she announced to the room. We've filed the $10 million civil lawsuit against Derek Mitchell. We're also pursuing a separate lawsuit against Cromwell Finance for negligent supervision and creating a hostile environment through their pattern of covering up discriminatory behavior. David Kim, the head of public relations, raised his hand. The media response has been overwhelming. We've had interview requests from every major network. 60 Minutes wants a sit-down with Ms. Coleman. The Today Show wants to do a week-long series on discrimination in corporate America. Zara looked up from the legal briefs she was reviewing. Accept the 60 Minutes interview. Decline the rest for now. We need to control the narrative carefully. This isn't about personal vindication. It's about creating structural change. Jennifer Walsh, the Secretary of Transportation, joined the meeting by video conference from Washington. Ms. Coleman. I've spoken with the Attorney General's office. They're fast-tracking the federal task force on aviation equality. We can have the first meeting within 2 weeks. What's the timeline for implementation? If we move quickly, we can have new federal regulations in place within 6 months. Mandatory anti-discrimination training, standardized reporting requirements, and federal oversight of complaint handling. Zara smiled for the first time in days. That's faster than I expected. The political will is there. When a story goes this viral, Congress pays attention. Nobody wants to be seen as defending discrimination. Dr. Angela Washington, a civil rights attorney who had joined Zara's team, spoke up from across the table. We're also getting support from unexpected places. The Association of Private Aviation Companies issued a statement endorsing our proposed reforms. The pilots' union released a letter saying they've witnessed discrimination but lacked formal channels to report it. What about resistance? Some predictable pushback from industry lobbyists, but they're being very careful. Nobody wants to be associated with defending Derek Mitchell's behavior. Zara nodded. Good. The faster we can turn this moment into lasting change, the better. Meanwhile, the personal cost of Derek's actions was becoming clear for everyone in his orbit. Catherine Mitchell was in her attorney's office going through the details of her divorce filing. She had been married to Derek for 23 years, and extracting herself from his life was like untangling a spiderweb. Catherine, you need to understand that this is going to be very public, her lawyer Susan Rodriguez explained. The media is going to want to interview you. They're going to ask what you knew about Derek's behavior and when you knew it. Catherine had been dreading this conversation. I knew he had attitudes. I knew he made comments. But I never thought it was this bad. Did you ever witness him discriminating against anyone directly? Catherine was quiet for a long moment, remembering 100 small incidents she had chosen to ignore. The way Derek spoke to service workers, the assumptions he made about people based on their appearance, the casual cruelty he inflicted on anyone he considered beneath him. Yes, she said quietly. Many times. Are you willing to testify about what you witnessed Catherine thought about her daughter away at college, who had called crying after seeing the video? She thought about all the times she had stayed silent when she should have spoken up. She thought about the woman in the hoodie who had shown more courage in one afternoon than Catherine had shown in 23 years of marriage. Yes, I'll testify. Susan made a note in her file. Catherine, you should know that testifying against Derek could make you a target for his legal team. They might try to claim you're an unreliable witness or that you have ulterior motives because of the divorce. I don't care. I'm done being complicit. While Catherine was finding her courage, Derek was losing the last vestiges of his dignity. The cheap hotel where he was staying had become a media circus. Reporters camped outside his door. Camera crews followed him to the convenience store when he bought coffee and stale sandwiches. Someone had leaked his room number, and his phone rang constantly with calls from journalists offering money for exclusive interviews. But the worst humiliation was still coming. At noon on Friday, Cromwell Finance held a press conference to announce Derek's termination and Margaret Hoffman's resignation. The event was broadcast live on every financial news network. Margaret stood at a podium in the company's marble lobby, looking like she had aged 10 years overnight. Cromwell Finance deeply regrets the incident involving our former employee, Derek Mitchell. She began, her voice trembling slightly. Mr. Mitchell's behavior was reprehensible and completely contrary to our company values. He has been terminated immediately and will forfeit all severance and benefits. A reporter shouted a question. Did you know about Mr. Mitchell's history of discrimination complaints? Margaret paused, knowing that her answer would determine whether she faced criminal charges for covering up discriminatory behavior. I was not fully informed about the scope of Mr. Mitchell's behavioral issues. That failure of communication represents a breakdown in our oversight processes that I take full responsibility for. Another reporter. Are you resigning because of the Derek Mitchell scandal? I am resigning because I failed to protect our employees and clients from discriminatory behavior. That failure is unacceptable, and I will not allow my mistakes to further damage this company's reputation. Margaret walked away from the podium without taking any more questions, ending a 30-year career in finance. Derek watched the press conference from his hotel room, realizing that his former boss had just thrown him completely under the bus. Margaret's carefully worded statement made it clear that Derek was a rogue employee whose behavior was unknown to senior management. But Derek knew the truth. Margaret had been aware of his complaints. She had signed off on the settlement payments. She had transferred him to different departments to avoid problems rather than addressing his behavior. Now she was saving herself by sacrificing him completely. Derek's lawyer called with more bad news. Derek, the prosecutor, is offering a plea bargain. Plead guilty to federal interference charges and serve 18 months in minimum security prison. If you go to trial and lose, you're looking at 5 years minimum. What about the civil lawsuit Ms. Coleman's attorneys are willing to settle for $5 million and a public apology? If it goes to trial, they're asking for $20 million. Derek did the math. He was worth approximately $12 million in total assets, most of which were tied up in real estate and investments that Catherine would get in the divorce. After legal fees and settlements, he would be bankrupt. I need time to think. Derek, this offer expires at midnight tonight. After that, both the criminal prosecutor and Coleman's attorneys withdraw all plea bargain options. Derek hung up and stared at the ceiling of his cheap hotel room. Outside, protesters were chanting his name. Television crews were providing live updates on his legal situation. Social media influencers were making content about his downfall. He had become a cautionary tale, a symbol of what happened when privilege met accountability. And the worst part was he was beginning to understand that he deserved it. At 6 p.m., Zara Coleman appeared on the evening news for her first interview since the incident. Anderson Cooper leaned forward across his CNN desk. Ms. Coleman, you've been remarkably quiet since Tuesday's incident. What's your message to Derek Mitchell? Zara was composed, dressed in a simple black suit, her voice steady and clear. Anderson, this was never about Derek Mitchell personally. This was about a pattern of behavior that's been tolerated for too long. When powerful people face no consequences for discrimination, it creates a culture where that behavior is normalized. Are you satisfied with his arrest and the civil lawsuit? I'm satisfied that the legal process is working, but individual accountability is only the first step. We need structural changes that prevent these incidents from happening in the first place. What kind of changes? The Aviation Equality Alliance is launching a $100 million initiative to end discrimination in air travel. Federal oversight, mandatory training, victim advocacy, and public reporting of all discrimination incidents. Cooper nodded. Some critics say you're using this incident to advance a political agenda. Zara smiled, and there was steel in her expression. Anderson equality isn't a political agenda. It's a human right. If ensuring that all passengers are treated with dignity is controversial, then we have a much bigger problem than Derek Mitchell. The interview aired to 12 million viewers and was shared across social media platforms for days afterward. It became the definitive statement on the incident, cementing Zara's position as a leader in the fight for civil rights. At 11:59 p.m., 1 minute before the plea bargain deadline, Derek Mitchell's attorney called the prosecutor. My client accepts the deal. Derek Mitchell, former senior vice president at Cromwell Finance, would serve 18 months in federal prison and pay $5 million to settle Zara Coleman's lawsuit. But more importantly, he would become the first person prosecuted under new federal guidelines for discrimination in aviation. His case would be studied in law schools. His name would appear in corporate training materials. His mugshot would hang in human resources offices as a warning about the consequences of unchecked prejudice. Derek Mitchell had thought he was defending his right to first-class seating. Instead, he had become the poster child for why equality couldn't wait any longer. 18 months later, Derek Mitchell walked out of the Federal Correctional Institution in Otisville, New York, carrying a small duffel bag and wearing clothes that no longer fit properly. His expensive watch was gone sold to pay legal fees. His custom suits had been donated to charity. His perfectly styled hair had grown out gray and unkempt. The man who emerged from federal prison bore little resemblance to the arrogant executive who had boarded a private jet on that October afternoon. Prison had stripped away everything that Derek had used to define himself: his wealth, his status, his connections, his sense of superiority. What remained was something much smaller, and perhaps for the first time in his adult life, actually human. A single reporter waited outside the prison gates. Not the media circus Derek had expected, but one persistent journalist from a local newspaper who specialized in covering the aftermath of viral scandals. Mr. Mitchell, what have you learned from this experience? Derek paused, squinting in the afternoon sunlight. For 18 months, he had thought about how he would answer this question. I learned that I was a terrible person, he said quietly. I spent 45 years thinking I was better than other people, and I was wrong. I hurt people who didn't deserve to be hurt, and I can't undo that damage. Do you blame Ms. Coleman for your downfall? Derek shook his head. Ms. Coleman didn't destroy my life. I did. She just held up a mirror and forced me to see who I really was. The reporter scribbled notes. What are your plans now? Derek looked around at the world he would have to navigate without money, without connections, without the privileges that had insulated him from consequences for so long. I'm going to try to earn back the right to call myself a decent human being. It's going to take a long time. He walked away from the prison toward a bus station, leaving behind the last remnants of his former life. Meanwhile, 200 miles south in Washington, D.C., Zara Coleman was signing legislation that would transform the aviation industry forever. The Aviation Equality Act had passed Congress with overwhelming bipartisan support, one of the few issues that Democrats and Republicans could agree on in an increasingly polarized political environment. The bill mandated federal oversight of discrimination complaints, required anti-bias training for all aviation personnel, and established a national database to track incidents across the industry. This legislation ensures that no passenger will ever again face the kind of treatment that Derek Mitchell thought was acceptable, Zara said as she handed the signing pen to President Martinez. But more than that, it sends a message that discrimination has no place in American transportation. Secretary of Transportation Jennifer Walsh stood beside her, beaming with pride. The federal task force that Ms. Coleman chaired produced the most comprehensive civil rights reforms in aviation history. We've already seen a 60% reduction in discrimination complaints industry-wide. The signing ceremony was held in the Rose Garden, attended by civil rights leaders, aviation industry executives, and members of Congress. But the most important guests were the ordinary passengers who had faced discrimination and previously had no recourse. Maria Santos, now serving as Deputy Secretary of Transportation, read statistics that told the story of transformation. Since the Derek Mitchell incident, we've documented over 3,000 cases where bystanders intervened to stop discriminatory behavior. Flight attendants report that passengers are more likely to speak up when they witness unfair treatment. The culture of silence that protected discrimination for decades has been broken. But the changes went far beyond aviation. Corporate America had undergone a seismic shift in how it handled discrimination complaints. The Derek Mitchell protocols had become standard practice in human resources departments across the country. Immediate investigation of bias complaints, mandatory reporting to federal agencies, and zero-tolerance policies for retaliatory behavior. Business schools now taught case studies analyzing how Cromwell Finance's cover-up of discriminatory behavior had led to the company's collapse. The firm had been forced to sell its assets to pay legal settlements and was eventually acquired by a competitor for a fraction of its former value. Catherine Mitchell had become an unlikely advocate for corporate accountability. After testifying against Derek in his criminal trial, she had used her divorce settlement to establish the Catherine Mitchell Foundation for Workplace Equality. The organization provided legal support for discrimination victims and lobbied for stronger corporate governance standards. "I spent 23 years married to a man who treated other people as less than human," Catherine said, during a speech at a corporate ethics conference. "I stayed silent because it was easier than confronting his behavior. But silence is complicity, and complicity is a choice. I want to help other people make better choices than I did." Sophia Morales, the flight attendant who had handled the original incident with such professionalism, was now the Director of Passenger Rights for the Federal Aviation Administration. She traveled the country training aviation personnel on de-escalation techniques and bias recognition. "What we learned from the Derek Mitchell case is that discrimination thrives in environments where people are afraid to speak up," Sophia explained to a room full of airline executives. "When we give employees the tools and authority to intervene, most incidents can be stopped before they escalate." Captain James Rodriguez had been promoted to Chief of Safety for the entire private aviation fleet. The recordings he made during the original incident were now used in training programs to teach pilots when and how to document passenger misconduct. Pilots have a responsibility to ensure the safety of everyone on their aircraft, Captain Rodriguez told a gathering of aviation professionals. That includes protecting passengers from harassment and discrimination. But perhaps the most profound transformation was happening in the lives of ordinary people who had been inspired by Zara Coleman's example. Dr. Angela Washington, the civil rights attorney who had worked on Zara's legal team, was now the executive director of the National Aviation Equality Coalition. She had documented thousands of cases where passengers stood up to discriminatory behavior, citing the Derek Mitchell incident as their inspiration. "People saw what happened when someone refused to be victimized," Dr. Washington explained. "They realized that they didn't have to accept unfair treatment, and they didn't have to stay silent when they witnessed injustice." The Derek Mitchell incident had become a watershed moment, marking the end of an era when discrimination could be quietly tolerated and the beginning of a new standard for corporate accountability. Linda Parker, the passenger who had filmed the original confrontation, had become a sought-after speaker on the power of bystander intervention. Her TikTok video, which had been viewed over 200 million times, was now shown in diversity training programs around the world. "I almost didn't hit record," Linda admitted during interviews. "I thought it might be invasive or inappropriate. But I'm grateful I documented what happened because it provided evidence that couldn't be denied or minimized." Miguel Santos, whose Instagram live stream had reached millions of viewers, had started a non-profit organization called Witness for Justice that trained people to safely document discrimination incidents. Technology gives us the power to hold people accountable in ways that weren't possible before, Miguel explained. But with that power comes responsibility to use it ethically and effectively. The ripple effects extended far beyond the aviation industry. Hotels began implementing Zara Coleman standards for guest services, requiring staff to treat all customers with equal respect, regardless of appearance or perceived socioeconomic status. Restaurants adopted policies prohibiting discrimination in seating and service quality. Retail stores created customer bill of rights that explicitly protected against profiling and harassment. The business case for equality had become undeniable. Companies that implemented strong anti-discrimination policies saw improved customer satisfaction, reduced legal liability, and better employee retention. Discrimination wasn't just morally wrong, it was bad for business. Derek Mitchell's former colleagues at Cromwell Finance had scattered to other firms, carrying with them hard-learned lessons about the consequences of tolerating toxic behavior. Many reported that they were more likely to speak up when they witnessed discrimination, having seen firsthand how quickly careers and companies could be destroyed by viral incidents. Margaret Hoffman, the former CEO who had resigned in disgrace, spent 2 years in therapy before launching a consulting firm that specialized in helping companies identify and address discriminatory practices before they became public relations disasters. "The Derek Mitchell case taught us that ignorance is no longer a viable defense," Margaret explained to corporate clients. "In an age of social media and smartphones, every employee interaction is potentially public. Companies have to proactively address bias, not reactively manage crises. But the most significant changes were often the quietest ones. Flight attendants reported that passengers were more polite and respectful. Airport staff noted that complaints about discriminatory treatment had dropped dramatically. Private aviation companies implemented customer dignity standards that prioritized respect over revenue. In countless small ways, the Derek Mitchell incident had shifted cultural expectations about how people should treat each other. The Derek Mitchell case studies were now required reading in business school ethics courses. Law schools used the incident to teach students about the intersection of criminal law, civil rights, and corporate liability. Psychology programs analyzed the case as an example of how unconscious bias could lead to destructive behavior. Derek's name had become synonymous with the dangers of unchecked privilege and the importance of personal accountability. But perhaps the most powerful transformation was the one that had taken place in Derek Mitchell himself. During his 18 months in federal prison, Derek had been required to participate in bias awareness counseling and anger management programs. For the first time in his life, he was forced to confront the impact of his actions on other people. The most difficult moment came during a victim impact session where he was required to write a letter to Zara Coleman, acknowledging the harm he had caused. The letter was never sent. Zara had made it clear through her attorneys that she wanted no contact with Derek. But the exercise forced him to grapple with the full scope of his behavior. "I used to think that success meant accumulating enough wealth and status to insulate myself from other people," Derek wrote in a journal that prison counselors required him to keep. "I thought that if I could climb high enough, I wouldn't have to see the people I was stepping on. But isolation isn't success. It's just another form of prison." Derek's journey toward redemption would be long and uncertain. He had lost his family, his career, his wealth, and his social standing. But he had gained something that had been missing from his life for decades: humility. As he rode the bus away from prison toward an uncertain future, Derek carried with him the hardest lesson he had ever learned: that true strength comes not from dominating others, but from recognizing their fundamental human dignity. The Derek Mitchell who had boarded that private jet 18 months earlier no longer existed. In his place was a man who would spend the rest of his life trying to atone for the damage that his former self had inflicted on the world. Whether he would succeed remained to be seen. But for the first time in his adult life, Derek Mitchell was finally asking the right questions about what it meant to be a decent human being. And that perhaps was the beginning of real change. 2 years after the incident that changed everything, Zara Coleman stood in the same private jet cabin where Derek Mitchell had tried to humiliate her into giving up her seat. The aircraft was preparing for departure from Westchester County Airport bound for Los Angeles, where Zara would deliver the keynote speech at the National Conference on Transportation Equality. But this flight held special significance beyond its destination. Today marked the second anniversary of what the media had dubbed the incident that sparked a movement. Sophia Morales, now wearing the uniform of a Federal Aviation Administration supervisor, greeted Zara at the aircraft door with a warm smile. "Ms. Coleman, welcome aboard. It's an honor to have you flying with us today." "Sophia, the honor is mine. You've come so far since that difficult day." Sophia's eyes sparkled with pride and purpose. "That day changed my life. It taught me that staying professional means protecting people, not just following procedures." As Zara settled into seat 1A, her seat the one that Derek Mitchell had tried to steal, she ran her fingers over a small scuff mark on her leather bag. The mark left by Derek's shoe during their confrontation had never been repaired. It served as a reminder of how far she had traveled, not in miles, but in impact. Captain James Rodriguez's voice came over the intercom with the familiar pre-flight announcement, but today his words carried extra meaning. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Meridian 1. As we prepare for departure, I want to remind everyone that this aircraft represents more than transportation. It represents the principle that every passenger, regardless of appearance or background, deserves dignity and respect." The cabin held only a few passengers today. In addition to Zara, there was Dr. Angela Washington, who would be presenting research on the effectiveness of federal aviation reforms. Miguel Santos, the passenger whose live stream had helped document the original incident, was now working as a documentary filmmaker and was capturing footage for a film about corporate accountability. But the most significant passenger was Catherine Mitchell. Derek's former wife had requested permission to fly with Zara today, not as a gesture of reconciliation, but as an act of personal courage. Catherine was traveling to Los Angeles to testify before a congressional committee about the importance of corporate whistleblower protections. Coleman Catherine said as they reached cruising altitude. "I need you to know something. The day Derek treated you so horribly, I wanted to speak up. I knew his behavior was wrong, but I was afraid of the confrontation it would create." Zara turned to study Catherine's face. 2 years had transformed Derek's former wife from a silent accomplice to a powerful advocate for change. Catherine had used her divorce settlement to fund legal support for discrimination victims, and had become one of the most effective voices for corporate accountability reform. Mrs. Mitchell courage isn't the absence of fear. It's acting despite the fear. You found your voice when it mattered most. Catherine's eyes filled with tears. "I testified against my own husband. I helped send him to prison. Sometimes I wonder if I did the right thing. You did the only thing that could break the cycle. Derek needed to face consequences for his actions, and other victims needed to see that accountability was possible." Through the oval windows, Zara could see the landscape of America passing below. Somewhere down there, Derek Mitchell was beginning his new life as an ex-convict working at a car wash in New Jersey and living in a studio apartment that cost more per month than he used to spend on lunch. She didn't take satisfaction in his downfall. Derek's punishment had never been the point. The point was ensuring that no one else would have to endure what she had experienced in this very cabin. Ma'am Sophia said, approaching with an envelope. This arrived for you just before takeoff. The sender insisted it be delivered during the flight." Zara opened the envelope and found a handwritten letter on cheap notebook paper. "Ms. Coleman." It began in shaky handwriting. "I know you don't want to hear from me, and I understand why. I'm not writing to ask for forgiveness or to make excuses for my behavior. I'm writing because I need you to know that what happened on that airplane saved my life." Zara continued reading, surprised by the vulnerability in Derek's words. "For 45 years, I lived as a person I'm ashamed to have been. I treated people like objects. I valued wealth over character. I thought that having money made me better than everyone else. I was wrong about everything." The letter went on for 3 pages, detailing Derek's journey through prison therapy and the slow, painful process of rebuilding his understanding of human dignity. "I work at a car wash now," Derek's letter concluded. "My co-workers are mostly immigrants and people of color, the same people I used to look down on. They've taught me more about honor and integrity than I learned in 20 years of elite business education. I'm learning very slowly how to be a decent person. I wanted you to know that the terrible thing I did to you led to the first honest conversation I've ever had with myself. I can never undo the harm I caused, but I can try to live differently going forward. I hope that your continued success brings justice to people who need it. You changed my life by refusing to accept my cruelty. Thank you." Zara folded the letter and looked out the window again. She felt no anger toward Derek Mitchell, no satisfaction in his suffering. What she felt was something more complex and ultimately more hopeful, the recognition that change was possible even for someone who had seemed irredeemable. Dr. Angela Washington leaned over from across the aisle. "Zara, I've been reviewing the latest data on aviation discrimination complaints. We're seeing a 73% reduction in reported incidents since the federal reforms were implemented. That's remarkable progress. More than that, it's cultural transformation. Flight attendants tell us that passengers are intervening when they witness unfair treatment. The bystander effect that allowed discrimination to flourish has been replaced by a culture of accountability." Miguel Santos looked up from his camera. "Ms. Coleman, can I ask you something for the documentary? Do you ever think about what would have happened if Derek Mitchell had just apologized that day?" Zara considered the question carefully. "Miguel, I think Derek was incapable of a genuine apology at that point in his life. He would have offered some hollow words to avoid consequences, but he wouldn't have changed. Sometimes people need to face the full weight of their actions before they can grow. Do you think he's genuinely changed now? I think he's trying to change, which is more than he was doing 2 years ago. Whether he succeeds depends on choices he makes every day going forward." Captain Rodriguez's voice returned to the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our descent into Los Angeles. Current weather is clear skies and unlimited visibility. Clear skies and unlimited visibility." Zara smiled at the metaphor. The Derek Mitchell incident had cleared away the fog that had allowed discrimination to hide in shadows. Now everyone could see clearly what needed to be fixed. As the aircraft touched down in Los Angeles, Zara thought about the speech she would give that evening. She had been invited to address 10,000 transportation industry professionals about the progress that had been made and the work that still needed to be done. But her message wouldn't be about Derek Mitchell, or even about discrimination specifically. It would be about the power that every person possessed to demand dignity, both for themselves and for others. The Derek Mitchell incident had become a turning point, not because one man was punished for his behavior, but because millions of people decided they would no longer tolerate injustice in silence. Flight attendants who had previously ignored discriminatory behavior now intervened immediately. Passengers who had once looked away when others were mistreated now spoke up. Corporate executives who had once hidden behind legal settlements now implemented proactive policies to prevent discrimination. The change wasn't complete. Bias still existed, discrimination still occurred. But the culture of silence that had protected such behavior was broken forever. As Zara walked through Los Angeles International Airport toward her waiting car, she passed dozens of travelers of every race, ethnicity, and background. They moved through the terminal with confidence, knowing that federal law now protected their right to be treated with dignity. A young black girl, no more than 12 years old, walked past wearing a t-shirt that read, "Know Your Worth." She looked up at Zara with bright, curious eyes, unaware that she was seeing the woman who had helped create a world where her worth would be recognized regardless of what she was wearing or where she came from. That evening, Zara stood before 10,000 aviation professionals and delivered a speech that would be remembered as a defining moment in the civil rights movement. 2 years ago, a man named Derek Mitchell made a choice she began. He chose to see a black woman in casual clothes and decide she didn't belong in first class. He chose to use his perceived power to try to humiliate someone he considered beneath him. He chose cruelty over kindness, prejudice over compassion. The audience was completely silent. But that same day, other people made different choices. Sofia Morales chose professionalism over comfort. Captain Rodriguez chose documentation over denial. Linda Parker chose to record rather than look away. Miguel Santos chose to broadcast injustice rather than ignore it. Catherine Mitchell chose truth over loyalty. Zara paused, letting the words sink in. Derek Mitchell thought he was fighting for a seat. He didn't realize he was fighting against the future. He didn't understand that his behavior would spark a movement that would transform not just aviation, but corporate culture across America. She looked out at the faces in the audience. Faces of every color and background united in their commitment to creating a more just industry. The most expensive thing Derek Mitchell ever bought wasn't his first-class ticket. It was the lesson that dignity cannot be purchased, power without accountability is worthless, and silence in the face of injustice is complicity. The standing ovation lasted for 7 minutes. Later that night, Zara sat alone in her hotel room, looking out at the lights of Los Angeles spread below like stars fallen to earth. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Ms. Coleman, this is Maria Santos from Derek's old company. I wanted you to know that we just implemented the strongest anti-discrimination policies in our industry's history. We named them the Coleman Standards. Thank you for showing us what real leadership looks like." Similar messages had been arriving for months from companies around the world. The Derek Mitchell incident had become a case study in business schools, a training module in corporate sensitivity programs, and a benchmark for federal policy reform. But more than that, it had become proof that change was possible when ordinary people refused to accept extraordinary injustice. Zara thought about Derek Mitchell somewhere in New Jersey, trying to rebuild his life with humility instead of arrogance. She hoped he would succeed not for his sake, but for the sake of everyone whose life he would touch going forward. She thought about the 12-year-old girl in the airport terminal growing up in a world where her dignity was protected by law and supported by culture. She thought about Sofia Morales, Catherine Mitchell, Dr. Angela Washington, and all the other people who had found their voices in the aftermath of that difficult day. And she thought about Seat 1A, the owner's seat on her private jet, which would always represent something more than luxury travel. It would represent the principle that everyone deserves respect regardless of what they're wearing or where they come from. Derek Mitchell had tried to take her seat. Instead, he had given her a platform to change the world. And sometimes, Zara reflected as she prepared for sleep, the most powerful responses to hatred were not anger or revenge, but the quiet determination to build something better from the wreckage of someone else's cruelty. The jet that had carried Derek Mitchell toward his downfall was now carrying others toward justice, dignity, and hope. And that perhaps was the most fitting consequence of all. If you've witnessed discrimination on a flight, in a boardroom, or anywhere your dignity was questioned, your story matters. Share it below. Because when we speak up together, we build a world where respect isn't a privilege, it's a right. Hit that like button if this story moved you. Subscribe for more stories of justice and inspiration. And remember, you never know when your moment to stand up for what's right will arrive. When it comes, be ready. Don't forget to share this video with someone who needs to hear this message today. Together, we can create a world where everyone gets the respect they deserve, regardless of what they look like or where they come from. Until next time, stay strong, stay just, and never underestimate the power of standing your ground with dignity and grace.